And we have Robert's on, of course, and Sarit, where are you?
Oh, Sarit spoke to us last week, remember, at the end of the class
Oh,
about
yes.
Miskin, right?
And Sarit, you were right, and I was wrong. You were absolutely correct. And you corrected a mistake that I've been making all my life. But I'm into also Hebrew words that, there is a type of commentary where words that sound similar, they speak to each other. There is such an idea. And the truth is that Miskain is it sounds like Miskain, but I did look up the word Miskain with a samachaf, exactly as Sarit said. It is associated with the word sakana.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So you're absolutely correct. Where are you talking from, Sarit?
Can you hear me? Am I muted?
Yeah.
We hear you. We hear you.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm from North Potomac, Maryland, which is a suburb of DC.
Right. So Nissen Antin, is he your rabbi?
Excuse me?
In Potomac, there's a Chovevei rabbi, Nissen Antin, or Uri
No.
Topolovsky. Do you know Uri?
I know that name,
We
but
got to
we
introduce you
belong
to
to
them.
B'nai Israel in Rockville. There are a lot of synagogues here. As a matter of fact, I have 4 different ones of different denominations within walking distance.
Okay, beautiful. And Robert, let me see where Robert is. That's great. And I see Linda where, then we have Bert is on. I'm sure Janet's on. Hi, Janet. And is Laser on? Laser?
I don't see Laser. Maybe it's Judy. Oh, there he is. Sorry, he is there.
Here I am.
Hi, Laser. Shuri, I really have to go over to Laser. I just have to see Laser.
Okay.
We have to try to make that happen. I would love that. And Judy is on. My Judy?
Hello, you hear me?
Yeah. Tell
You
me
hear
a
me?
good
Okay.
word. All right. So now that yes.
Yes. I'd like to say 2 things, if I may. Yesterday,
Of
I had
course.
at Bert Nussbacher's class to be educated by Rabbanit Devorah Zlotshauer about the mitzvah of candlelighting. And our granddaughter, the oldest of our grandchildren, she will, in Yirtz Hashem, be bat mitzvahed in June, where she lives in Columbus, Ohio, and of course, in Yirtz Hashem will attend. So, and she is learning the same mitzvah. So I learned about one of the reasons that we light candles is to have shalom bayit. So I connected that to her, and I shared that with her about shalom bayit and lighting candles. Anyway,
Beautiful.
the other thing I wanted to say is, Rav Avi, I know about this certain program called the Jerusalem Conference, and my friend, who you know, Ditsa Or, the mother of
course.
Aviv,
She's the mother of the young man who was dating
Avi
She will be
Natan.
one of at this conference, and I'm trying to find out details as to when she will be speaking, and that's not the easiest thing to do. Anyway, I contacted the Fifth Avenue Synagogue. They referred me right back to the announcement. That didn't have the timing, so I even WhatsApped Ditsa herself to see if she would tell me when she'll be speaking. I don't know if I'll get an answer.
Judy, and he is still being held hostage?
Yes. Let's hope that he is alive.
My God.
Very my God.
Okay. So Lance, who means so much to me, had mentioned last week, asked a little question about love thy neighbor as thyself, but last week we decided to talk about, and we did a little session on respecting the elderly, and truly, this comes from a deep place. I learned so much more from all of you than I had to offer. And I'm deeply, deeply appreciative. I actually jotted down notes, and if I ever write it again, write about this issue, which I've written about, I very much want to incorporate so much of what many of you said. But there is another sentence which is so very well known, and it's in chapter 19, sentence, is it 17? Let me take a quick look.
18.
Thank you. Thank you. We used to play a game in my home on Friday nights. The kids would read a sentence, especially from Breshit, and I would say, oh, that's chapter 10, sentence 32. And you know what they would say? Okay, now we know what sentence it's not. I never quite got it right. But you're right. Here it is. It says in sentence 18, Lo tikon velo titor et b'nei amecha. Lo tikon velo titor et b'nei amecha. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but the ahavta l'reacha kamocha, those three words. Now, I want to concentrate on those three words, the ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and I'm not going to speak long because I want to hear what everyone has to say, but I want to say something about each of these words. The first is, and one could spend a lot of time on the conjunctive, on the. It's one of the only commandments in Kedoshim, and there are many interpersonal relationship commandments here. This is the only one that begins with a conjunctive, which means that whatever is being said is connected to what had previously been put forth. But for a moment, let's look at that central word, ahavta, and then the word lireacha. There, the lamed 2 requires a lot of discussion, kamocha. And so our point of departure is, what is love? How does one achieve love? And one of the best essays I've ever read on love was written by Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler. He was the spiritual leader of the Panovich Yeshiva. And there's stuff that he's written that I struggle with very, very much. But there are other stuff that he's written that really, really is incisive, and it's psychologically, it's touched my soul. And so I'm honored to share it with you. He argues that the cornerstone of love is to give. That's what he argues. And while it is true that I can love you, and because I love you, that I give to you, the reverse is also true. I give to you, and from the giving comes love. And the more I give, the greater the love becomes. The secret to Ahavah is to look at the two central letters of Ahavah. Now, this may not be grammatically correct, but certainly those two central letters are right there. And those are the letters Hav. Hey, vet. Hey, vet is a word which is used in the Gemara. Havli, give to me. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Years back, Toby and I, many years back, probably 45 years ago, 50 years ago, that long back, we went to a program called Marriage Encounter. And when you would go into the room, we had to take off our watches for 2 days. They would have slogans on the wall. And I still remember one of them. The slogan read, "Love is a decision." That doesn't deny the reality that love is also a feeling, but love is a decision. Because if love is only a feeling, feelings are fickle. They're like yo-yos. One day one could have a feeling, and the next day one may not have a feeling. Feelings, as they would say, are not right, they're not wrong, they just are. But if love is a decision, that is associated with an action. And from the action of the giving, love comes. And that really is where the story that many, many of you know emerged from, that I've mentioned many, many times. And that is the story of my parents, whom I would pick up at the airport because I was the only child living in New York. My siblings live elsewhere. And I was scheduled to pick up my parents when my mother was alive. So this goes back to the 70s and the very, very early 80s. And my mother wasn't well then already. And my father calls to tell me that they've changed their arrival. And I said, like the important rabbi I thought I was, now I know the truth. I said, Abba, I cleared my schedule for Wednesday. I can't make it Thursday. I love you. It's just too hard. And my father said to me, you know, Mommy's not feeling well. It's hard for us to hail a cab. No Ubers in those days. We'd really appreciate if you can pick us up. And I said, you know how much I love you. I love you so much. My father then says, and he only meant it out of love, he says, Avrumi, because my parents always called me Avrumi. That was the name that I grew up with. Avrumi, which brings me back to my youth. So every time he said Avrumi sternly, I would shake a little bit. He said, Avrumi, you become a hotshot rabbi. You don't have time to pick your parents up at the airport. He didn't mean anything like that. He just meant it out of love. You know, and I said, Abba, you know how much I love you. You know how much I love Mommy. You know how much I love Dad, you. It's difficult. And he very famously said for our shul, he said, Avrumi, don't love me so much. Just pick me up at the airport. That's a great line. That is a great line. And that is what Rav Dessler is talking about, giving. And from the giving comes the loving. Think about love relationships that Bezrat Hashem, that each of us may have been involved in. You love someone and you want to give to that person. And the more one gives, the more one is connected, the more one invests in a relationship, the deeper the love. Now, as I've grown older, I've also learned that there is another side, and that is love also involves receiving. And sometimes it's easier to give than to receive. There is an art to receiving, because when one is receiving on some level, one may feel a dependency upon the other. One could feel a vulnerability. I remember when COVID started, our son Dove, and he never speaks to me this way, but he said, Abba, I know that in times of crisis, you always want to be out there. You want to be out there and you want to hug people. But if you're going to do that now, you are going to die. That's exactly what he said. He wanted to say it in a way that will startle me. And then Rav Stephen called and he asked that I do a tape, especially for people my age, a bit younger, a bit older. And it was very hard for me to do, but I spoke about the need to hold back and to be able to receive. But when you reach the point when you're served meals and you're being helped, there's an art. There's an art to graciousness in receiving. There is an art to not feeling like a nothing because of the vulnerability of the moment that one is in need of receiving. That's ahavta. Ahavta means when I love the other, I have to give to the other. The more I give, the more I love, and also the art of receiving. When I was in Rabbi Soloveitchik's class, he, in quick succession, in a year or two lost his wife. His wife died at a very young age, Tonya. He lost his brother, who we had a good relationship with. I'm not talking about Reb Aaron, with whom I was very close, but Reb Shmuel, who was a chemist. And he lost them. He lost his mother too around that time. And when he finally came back to class, I, all 20 years old of me, 21 years old, I wrote him a letter. And in those days, you actually wrote letters. And I said to him, Rebbe, you know that I hope you don't mind. I care about you. And I wasn't afraid of the O word even then. I said, I love you. And I just want you to know I'm thinking of you, and God should be with you. And I saw him in the hall, and at that time he was a pretty stern person. And he sees me and he says, in a very cordial way, he said, Avraham, thank you for the letter, but there was no need. There was no need to write it. I said, Rebbe, I hope it meant something to you, but the truth is, I had a need to write it. I had a need to say to you, I care about you, that I love you. So I want to put that out there for some thoughts on the word Ahavah. Now, reacha is an interesting word. Moving into this without connecting it to the first, even though in the end all these thoughts come together. Reacha is a complicated word because for the traditional commentaries, the Yerushalmi in Nedarim says that Rabbi Akiva quotes this sentence as the most important sentence in the Torah, the Ahavta l'reacha kamocha. But l'reacha is understood to be Jewish love. That is to say, that it means love your Jewish friend like yourself. It's not a universal statement. And that is why, after Rabbi Akiva mentions his position and his interpretation, another rabbi by the name of Ben Azai, he says, no, that the main sentence in the Torah is that every person is created in the image of God. Now, whenever you see 2 points of view, methodologically, what one should do is one should ask oneself, well, if there's a second opinion, what did the second person see problematic about the first to force the second opinion to be presented? And my sense is that when Ben Azai read that for Rabbi Akiva, it's v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love thy neighbor as thyself, and that is the love of a fellow Jew, he took exception to that. And he said, wait a minute, we're part of the larger world. What is the most important sentence is love humankind. And that's the sentence, every human being is created in the image of God. It's not that the image of God was placed in Abraham or Sarah, the first Jewish woman or the first Jewish man. It was placed in the first human being, as the Mishnah Sanhedrin says, from whom all of us come. So the love is more universal. And my sense is that both of those positions, I'd like to think, and this too is a methodology of studying text, I don't think that they disagree with each other. I think they live together in what's called dialectic. They're both correct on a certain level. Because the reality is that we have a special love for our people because they're our family. I love my inner family, my Toby, my children, grandchildren, siblings, parents in ways I don't love others. And I have a special love for Am Yisrael, special love for Medinat Yisrael. That is an unquenchable thirst that I have It is Avat Yisrael to love the Jewish people. Does that mean I don't love humankind? Of course I love humankind. As a matter of fact, I'd go so far to say that if I only love Jews and I wear blinders when it comes to concern for the larger world, that could lead to a particularism that could become fascist. Very problematic. But the flip side is also correct. I could become so universal. I could become so involved with the larger world that I forget my roots. I've said in the past that I sometimes get very nervous when someone comes to me and says, you know, Rabbi, this was the line of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. I want you to know, Rabbi, I love everyone. It would take me a long time to say what I'm about ready to tell you. But after discussion, the point I would try to make is, on some level, it's easy to love everyone. When you love everyone, you don't have to love anyone. The test of the way you love everyone is the way you love someone. So if I'm only that universalist, then I lose my sense of rootedness. I lose my sense of being who I am, my own personal identity. And the great sage Hillel says it best. In a very famous comment, he says, the Klal Gadol, the great principle is, in ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? And that's something we better remember, even with what's going on. You could be, and I don't mean this as a political statement, but I'm going to say it. You could be a Trump person, but what's going on now is very concerning, of locking Israel out of everything. And you wonder, I don't know exactly what the future is going to bring. But if we are not for ourselves, I really think Israel has to, I think that in the next 50 years, something I won't see, Israel has to get to the point where it is less dependent upon any outer resources. We are not for ourselves, who no one will be for us. But then the next comment is, Uchshani la'atzmi, but if I'm only for myself, more ani, what am I worth? So when one reads this word re'acha, one should see it within the larger context of what's called in fancy conceptual thought, the balance between particularism. Particularism is like the muscle which contracts, being the particularist Jew, and universalism. Universalism is the Jewish people as part of the larger world. Lire'acha, the Ahavah lire'acha, this sentence places great emphasis of not being embarrassed to have a special love, a special feeling for our fellow Jews, just as I think that others, it's natural to have a special feeling for those within their particular nationality. Americans may feel a special connection to Americans. Jews feel a special connection to Jews. Again, I repeat, that doesn't mean we don't care about others. Of course we do. It lives in balance. But I want to say something else about lire'acha. This term, lire'acha, is the term that is used under the chuppah. Sameach tisamach, the blessing which we say to bride and groom. May you be joyous, may you be happy. Re'im ha'ahuvim, beloved re'im. Now, what does re'im mean? Why do we use that term? It's actually a complicated word. Re'im, it's a noun, but it comes from the word re'ah, or the verb would be maybe ra'o'ah, resh ayin ayin, but it's re'ah. Now, re'ah, if I were to vocalize it differently, it's not re'ah, re'im, but it's ra. What does ra mean? Ra means evil. And so I'm wondering, the ahavta l'reacha kamocha, Real love is not when I don't see any fault in the other. In premarital counseling, if there's a couple and the bride and the groom can't see anything negative about the other, that's not love. That's infatuation. Love is, I see the weaknesses, I see the faults, but notwithstanding the faults, I still love you. And I can express my love for you as such. I can express what I feel towards you, because whatever I feel, I know you're not going to mock me, you're going to judge me. And even if I try to point out something that I wish you would do better, if it's in the framework of the Ahavah l'reacha kamocha, then it is accordingly received. True love is not when I love you without having ever been disappointed, that I love you without our relationship never have suffered a setback. The real test of a love that endures is we've had a setback. I've had a disappointment, and notwithstanding, I still love you. We still love each other. The Ahavah l'reacha kamocha. That, by the way, in very broad terms, speaks to our love for Eretz Yisrael. The love is so deep that after the Second Commonwealth, when we were exiled by Rome, we were without a state for 2,000 years. Notwithstanding that setback, we still loved. That's why the rabbis say, it's a fancy term, Kedusha Shniya, Kitcha L'Shata, the Kitcha L'Atid Lavo. The second love, that is the Second Commonwealth, is a love that forever endures. Now, why does it forever endure? Because despite that setback, the Herzls and the Jabotinskys and the Ben-Gurions and the Begins and our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents, they still dreamed and they still said, L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim. What does it mean to love Eretz Yisrael? It's not to look at the land of Israel as being perfect. My goodness, we're only 75 years old or 78 years old, whatever, 77 years old. But the love of Israel is, I see the warts, I see the wrinkles. I still love you. I still love you. I'm still enamored by the Holy Land. And the last word of the three is kamocha. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Is that really possible? Can one love another the way one loves oneself? But I want to put this out there for your consideration, that I think it's teaching a fundamental message about love, that to love another, this is not always true, but I think it's most often true, to love another means that I have to have an understanding of who I am. I have to have an understanding of what makes me tick. If I don't know who I am, if I'm struggling, it's hard to find another. The Ahavah l'reacha kamocha. There was another pitgam, another axiom they would put up on the walls in that marriage encounter. I'll tell you where it came from. They asked us to draw a vertical line down an empty piece of paper, and on one side to write down what we think is positive about ourselves, and on the other side to write down what we think is negative about ourselves. But here, we were asked that we not even share it with our spouse, only us. So I said to myself, that's easy. I'm first going to write all the good things about myself. I grabbed my pen. In those days, there was actually pens and pencils, which I think is a good thing, not a bad thing. And I about ready to write what is a good thing, and I stop and I say, wait a minute, I'm jotting down not what others may think of me, and I may have fooled them. I'm jotting down what I know to be the truth. And I'm telling you, at that point, there was nothing there. I said, oh my God, I have only 5 minutes. I better rush and write what's negative. And it came flowing, all the negativity. And what they tried to prove is, what they tried to show is that it's sometimes the case that we don't think much of ourselves. And if we don't think much of ourselves, or if we don't know who we are, what we represent, it creates obstacles to love another. And so the Pitkam, the saying that they would have on the wall, it read, let's see if I can remember it. Yes, God doesn't make junk. I still remember that. God doesn't make junk. After all, we are all created by God. We all have a little bit of God in us. God doesn't make junk. Humility is not thinking that I'm a nothing. That's not humility. Humility means a recognition of who one is. The humility comes in when I understand that whatever I have is a gift. It's something that I've achieved, but not myself. I had mentors, I had family, I had teachers, and they all contributed. That's a humility. If you go into a basketball game, since it's the next season, and you think you're going to lose, you're going to lose. But if you go in and you say, we have talent, I think we can do it, but you stay humble and recognize you can't do it yourself, that's the real deal. In fact, I take it a step further. Recognition of our strengths, I would argue, is a recognition of how God has blessed us. But with blessings come responsibility. With blessings come responsibilities. Those 3 words, Ahavah, love. Love from the word hav, to give. Love is this duality of giving and receiving. The more one gives, the more one loves. And learning the art of receiving in a relationship. Lireacha, love thy neighbor, thy fellow Jew, which doesn't, God forbid, means that we don't love the other, but to understand, as I've said many times, that a strong sense of self-identity does not contradict our universal responsibilities, but it's a prerequisite to it. And lireacha, even though I see the ra in the others, there's no relationship which is more close than, let's say, a spousal relationship. We know, if we're so blessed, we know what the other is. We know. You know, when it says in the Bible that Adam and Eve were erumim, that they were naked, it doesn't just mean that they were naked. It means that they took off all their masks. You see me as I am. Like Toby would say, take off your rabbi mask. Let's get down to it. Don't take off that mask. We all wear masks. We know who. It means that I know the other, but notwithstanding, once we know the other, there obviously are going to be issues that we all know are problematic, but I still love you. And I'm still here. I'm not here to criticize you or put you down. I'm here to enhance our love and maybe let's help each other improve. And kamocha, without love of self, there is no love of others. So with that, I want to stop, and I want to ask for your comments.
I have a comment, if you don't mind. I do you hear me?
Yes, very well.
I somehow I don't think you mentioned one thing that I consider, well, that I've discovered seems to be more than loving yourself or loving outer people, It's something, for instance, I cannot imagine that the soldiers who are serving in the Israeli army, I have a feeling they love each other more than even family, because my personal experience has been as much as, for instance, as parent, like my husband and I loved each other, my husband loved me, but there was nothing compared to the love that I saw evinced from the group that he was in when he was in Etzel. Each one loved each other so much more than, I believe, even family. I remember when, for instance, my husband was ill, if anybody was coming from Israel, the first thing they did was come here to see him, regardless of what else or whomever else they had to see. I remember when Allah Begin died, my husband, who never showed outward really emotion, he sat down and wrote a letter, the like of which I have never heard in my entire life. So it's circumstances also that control
Yes.
love, not only parents or outward or inner outward or outward inner. It's circumstances too.
Right. No, I absolutely. And just as an addendum to what you said, when I've never been in the military, but what you say resonates, but that love that they have for each other came from their dependency upon each other, their giving to each other, they're putting their lives on the line for each other. It came from a giving. But your point that it's not only family, you can create family too, and you can create that camaraderie within the army. It's last night I was up late and I caught the last part of the Yankee game they were at on the West Coast, and it was bases loaded, and the ball player on third base was Cabrera, and Judge, whom you should watch because he's like a Babe Ruth. He's really just a brilliant player.
Yes.
So he hits a fly ball to medium left field, and Cabrera, if you know the game, he tagged up. He missed home plate, and then he tried to swerve to touch home plate. And in so doing, something happened. And it was clear as soon as the trainer came out, he wasn't just, helping him up. He couldn't move.
I saw the play.
Right. And suddenly what touched me was all the Yankees were standing around him. And it was quite something. And the reason I think that is they're brothers.
Yes,
and
that's what you didn't mention until
right,
now.
right. And that's why I need you to always critique what I say. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, yeah, but this is just a conversation I had with Rabbi Ben Skydel, who knows how much I love you, Rav Avi. And when I complained to him about the balagan during Anim Zmirot at Orach Chaim, because every child is brought into the shul to come to the open aron, whether he's newborn or walks up by himself. And it really is a balagan. And I said to him, look what's happening in the shul during Anim Zmirot. Everybody is on their feet, and every child is either carried or walks up to the open aron. It's a balagan. And he said to me, but if Rav Avi is here, he would say, I feel the love.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Avi.
He's right. And I think one day we're going to do Anim Zmirot, and I'll be fine with it. Stephen is so sensitive to me not wanting to do things different. I said, Stephen, you do it your way. Just do it your way. And that could be a good idea. Arnie, I'm sorry.
Laser. Avi, I went around this idea by Gela, and she said she loves it, but it would make me very unpopular. To which I replied then and now, what else is new? I think that the concentration is upon the word neighbor, whether it's Jewish, non-Jewish, or worldwide, whatever. But I think we're concentrating on the wrong person. I think the phrase, as you love yourself, has to be explored more, because I think one has to learn to love themselves. And many in the world today do not love themselves. And that's why the world is in such a mess. And if
Now,
you can learn
now Leza is a great psychologist. Would you mind that in your experience you found that as well, that people don't care or don't see talent within themselves?
yes.
Mhm.
And it was especially when I was a teacher, it was very evident in some children. It was sometimes it took a long time for that to grow. And it's something that is worth
Yes.
investigating. And it should take, it reminds me of, I forget who said it, but he said sometimes a good idea grows better in the, not in the mind of the person who thought of it, but in the next person. Maybe I thought of this, but someone else should develop it more. Thank you.
Thank you, Leza.
Avi,
Yes, Arnie.
so I have a comment and a question. Comment is that I think loving your neighbor implies physical or geographic proximity and contact. So, for example, like in America right now, we're slowly dividing into red states and blue states, and people in bubbles don't talk to one another, and it's easier to become suspicious or hateful or of those that you never have any contact with. So I think neighbor is a specifically chosen word in that sentence. The question that I have is that I'm no Torah scholar, but I think in the Bible, we're commanded 3 loves: to love God, to love your neighbor, and to love the stranger. And I think to love the stranger is mentioned the most. So I was just wondering, in light of what you've been talking about today, what you make of that.
Mm-hmm. No, I think there's great, I think there's great truth. It's easy to love someone who's like yourself, a blue stater loving a blue stater, but the test of love is, can I love you even when we disagree? That's the test. That's the test of family love. The test of a family being a loving family is not when people or children are in agreement, but when they're not, can they still communicate? The first step in realizing this is making this a priority. When my grandfather, my father's father, died, he died penniless. He didn't have any money whatsoever, but he did leave a last will and testament. And in this last will and testament, he said, I know my children have gone in different directions, but I'd like them every month on a Saturday night to come together and join in what's called the Malava Malka. And I have memories of my uncles and aunts coming together in our home when there were 7 of them, when it was my parents' turn. And this was quite a group. There was one of my father's brothers was Hasidic, really Haredi. My father himself, when he came to America, he cut off his payas and he became an ardent, I have it from him and from my mother, an ardent religious Zionist. There were others who left observance, and there were others who were Litvish. They were more intellectual yeshiva, and they connected with each other. And you know, outside of I want for my children, I want them to have health and long life and the grandchildren. And you know, our Ilana's sixth, we've had 5 who have already been in the army. Now the 6th has finished training. I've told you this, his name is Gavi, and he's going into Gaza in a week or 2. And you know, I think the test of love of family is that there is a connection, no matter what, no matter what different paths one may be taking. I think about my siblings. You know, my sister Tova left Orthodoxy. She struggled with on the women's issue, very much influenced the little that I've done in that area. I have a brother Mordechai who is the most traditional of all of us, and I have a sister who's still living in the 60s with dreadlocks, the sweetest, kindest. And my brother Davi has smicha, ordination from Yeshiva University, and today is traditional egalitarian. Women doing Birkat Kohanim. But there's one thing that's remained steady. We love each other. Despite our differences, we love each other. And I've seen this in other families too. This is not well known, but the father of Art Scroll, Marvin Zlotowitz, who I would sit near in high school, he had a brother who was much older than he was, and his brother was the head of the Reform movement. Think about that. And I once said to him, to Meir, I said, do you talk to your brother? He said, every day. And I love that. That's what it should be. That's v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. That should be emphasized. It's easy to love somebody, you know, you lift and you respect. Can I love somebody with whom I have profound disagreements? I'm now trying to mediate. I can't get into the specifics on a terrible split. You know, the Zionist Congress, and there are all kinds of stuff going on there. These are people who are wonderful, but it's sort of like a semi-Knesset. When we're yelling at each other, the way we're yelling at each other in the Knesset, we're brothers, we're sisters, that's not good. It's just, you know, this sentence is easier said than done. And I'm talking to myself, letting you listen, because as you know, in my years of activism, I don't regret some of the positions I took. I do regret that there were times I feel I was inappropriate in the way I dealt with people with whom I disagreed. And, you know, it's something for all of us, for me to think about at least. Sarit, did you want to say something?
Yes, actually, I'm going back to the beginning of your talk.
Yes, please.
Back to the word love and giving. And I may misquote this because it's going back many years that I had read something. It was about behavior and acting in a way that you may not feel at the moment. But by acting in that way, certain feelings may grow. So to make it make sense, what I recall, and it's again long ago, it was basically relating to we could control our behavior, right? We can't control our feelings. But sometimes our behavior could be a prelude to what feelings end up becoming. So say you don't know that you really love a certain person, but you act in a way that you would if you love that person. It's almost like that song, If I Loved You. So you're more generous, you're giving. And the more you give, this connection starts forming. And
That's
before you know it, you have this connection with someone that initially, when you were two separate beings and didn't think about it, and you were just judging, do I love this person? There was no real connection. So, in a way, you have to belie your feelings and act in a certain way. So, say you're even angry, instead of right away showing your anger in sort of a passive aggressive way, you try to be bigger than that.
no,
So
that
I may be
resonates.
mistaken. There's a psychologist here on board that may correct me.
No, I
But
I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and there are so many people. I've had the honor to be a rabbinic counselor, and that's a different science. That's a different approach, and I actually think that the two complement each other. And most often, when there are serious issues, I refer out to people who are professionals in psychiatry and whatever. But in rabbinic counseling, there is a philosophy which is probably true in psychology, and that is I'm a behaviorist. And that comes from the tradition. It's said very beautifully by one of the earlier authorities, the Sefer HaChinuch. No one's quite sure who wrote that, but it's a book that's read widely. He has the language lefi ha'pu'ulot, in accordance with the actions, pu'ula, in accordance with the actions, nimshachim halavavot. The heart is drawn through the actions. And, what do you do when there's a disagreement and it gets complicated? One of the ways is if it still can be repaired, can one draft, literally, you draft on paper and pencil, these are the actions we want to take, and maybe that will alter feelings. I find some of the closest relationships that I've developed have been developed because I and the person I developed it with, we work at it. If I'm not going to be in contact with people, the relationship is going to stagnate. But if I'm in contact, and that impacts, don't love me so much, pick me up at the airport. Now, my father from the Altahim, they just, when you came from Poland in the 30s, you didn't say I love you easily. Although at the end of my father's life, in his 90s, he was a different person. He did his 90s grade, and he was saying, I love you. He didn't mean anything by that when he said, don't love me so much. He loved me. He loved me deeply. He loved all of his children. But I think he has a point there, that the picking up doesn't take away from the feeling. It could, as you're saying, you can't control a feeling. We can control an action, even if the action goes contrary to the feeling. Like, the Kutzka would say, the whole world is a very narrow bridge. The main thing is don't be afraid. Really? Don't be afraid? You're going to tell me? That's what I feel. The way I understand is, don't act as if you're afraid. You could be afraid. You can be afraid when you go to war. You could be afraid when you do this or you do that. But I could act contrary to what I feel. That's the sign of real greatness. I remember, some of you may remember that Sharon came to the shul actually on 2 occasions. And it was a big deal. Sharon came to the synagogue, and I remember introducing him once as the fearless general, 73, the pontoon bridges. We crossed the canal. He did this on his own against what the cabinet wanted. I called him the fearless general. He gets up and he looks at me and he says, Kavod Harav. And I learned from that, as soon as he said Kavod Harav, that when an Israeli says honored rabbi, you better duck. He said to me, flabbergasted, he said, what, do you think I wasn't afraid then? Do you think I wasn't afraid? So when I got up at the end, I said, Kavod ha general. Yeah, but you know what made you great? Despite the fact that you were afraid, guess what? You were heroic. I think you're less heroic when you don't have the fear. When you have the fear and nonetheless you do, that's a big deal. Thank you, Sarit. So I think we'll stop here. And this thing is running out of juice anyway. Just, it's so good to see everybody. And I'm not sure about next Tuesday. Am I correct about that, Shuli? Shuli may not be on.
Yeah, you're correct. I announced in the beginning that you're not having a class next week, but we'll pick it up the following week.
Right. Just want to bless everybody with godling, good health to everyone. Lance, thank you for pointing us to, what are we doing next week, Lance? What's on your agenda? What should we do?
You mean the following week?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. I have no idea, but I can say this. God is testing Abraham again, and Abraham again wins.
Thank you. Love you guys. Love you.
Love
Have
you
a wonderful
too.
day. Joyce, everybody.